Here's the data. You will see that in the second part of the 1800s, with commercialization of agriculture, expansion of agriculture in full force, that the US government was yearly distributing 800,000 to 3.5 to 10 million packages of seeds per annum. Now, this final figure, 10 million packages, that's not 10 million packets of seeds, that's 10 million boxes containing multiple packets of seeds. A tremendous amount of diversity. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture, in the end, was actually putting together catalogs and sending them through the mail to farmers with descriptions which actually are better than many of the gene bank descriptions today of the land races, showing what was available, which farmers could tick off and order. If you didn't tick it off, you were going to get seeds in the mail anyway. So this is how we established agriculture in our country, and in a sense, how our crops dealt with climate change as they left the climates of their homelands around the world and came to North America and found very different climates here. So as I look at the challenges of climate change, and the resources that we have in gene banks around the world, and the poor farmers that are out there, and wonder how we can put this together in some sensible way, and realizing the lag time that it takes to engage in plant breeding, it seems to me like something that we might, a situation where we might want to learn from our own history and begin to get prepared for what's coming down the road. What I fear, however, is that we will allow this mechanism of evolution, this diversity, to remain in the hands of fossilized institutions. And I think we can do much better than that. We now, for the most part, have, I think, largely solved the problem of, are well on the way of solving the problem of long-term conservation of our crop diversity. The Global Crop Diversity Trust is now overseeing the major gene banks of the world in the CGIAR, building an endowment to provide that kind of financial security. We have Svalbard. But what we now need to do is to push the gene banks of the world into making that link with the users, which are researchers, plant breeders, and ultimately farmers. In other words, I think we need to hearken back to my hero, Charles Darwin, who said that it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. Thank you.
I was wondering about going in the other direction from the farmers that have a wealth of genetic diversity which have not been subject to any kind of scientific experimentation or testing in order to enrich the whole process.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is a there is a great deal of diversity that still exists on the farm. It hasn't been captured, if you will, and put into gene banks. There have been about 150 crops historically that have entered into world commerce, and we only have collections, 1,000 or more accessions of 72 of those crops. In fact, probably half of those crops have never had a single Mendelian trained plant breeder working on them in all of history. And today we have some very important crops. Bananas are one, yams are another. 40 million metric tons of yams produced in the world every year. It'd take all the freight cars in North America to hold them. And there's 6 yam breeders, 6 breeders of bananas. So there's a huge amount of diversity out there, particularly of the minor crops, some of which are not minor at all. But of the major crops, the huge cereal grains, it's likely that most of the diversity has been captured. So we do have a challenge to collect and conserve the rest of that diversity and to match up, by the way, the gene bank holdings with actual breeding programs. One of the things that's always disturbed me when I've gone to visit gene banks, I, of course, check the temperature gauges and see what's really going on technically. But at some point during my visit, I try to ask two questions, and I try to separate them by some period of time so people don't know what's going on. And the first question I say, well, how many crops are you conserving here? And they'll tell me. And usually a national gene bank will say something like, well, we have diversity associated with about 50 or 70 crops. And a little bit later, 15 or 20 minutes later, I'll say, oh, by the way, in your country, how many crops do you have breeding programs for? And then the answer is always much smaller. So you begin to wonder if somebody from the Ministry of Finance isn't going to come in at some point and the financial bean counter and say, well, wait a minute now. You're spending a lot of our money conserving this diversity of a bunch of crops for which we don't have any breeding programs, right? And try to use that as an excuse for cutting the budget of the gene bank. So I think we do need to be careful as we expand gene bank holdings to also build in tight linkages with use, with research, with plant breeding and farmer activities.
So in addition to natural diversity, there's also what we might call artificial diversity, namely genetically modified seed. And I was wondering whether the vault accepts GM seed, and if you could comment a bit on the importance and also the issues surrounding that topic.
I always yeah. That was a question about GM, which I always expect to get. I have tried and true ways of avoiding that question. Let me try it on you.
I read I have my students read the article about you in the New Yorker, and that's an issue, the question that comes up, so I need to give them an answer.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, the seed vault, to our knowledge at least, does not contain any GM seeds. And the reason for that is that Norway happens to be a country that has exceedingly strict regulations about the importation of GM seed. And so the facility, the seed vault, doesn't meet the standards for importation of those types of seed. This is not a big concern to me. My concern is trying to conserve the diversity of agricultural crops. And my belief is, for the moment, we've got our hands full conserving the diversity as represented in the non-GM varieties, which is the overwhelming bulk of diversity, without getting into the political argument. I am very, very distressed and depressed by the level of the debate about GM in the world today, and how little it's science-based. And I'm distressed by the decibel readings in the debate. My experience being the head of an international organization dealing with crop diversity is that people on both sides of that debate want to put me in the middle and want to make it a litmus test of, well, are you for or against? I'm not sure that's the correct question to be asking, first of all. And I dodge that question because I don't want the Global Crop Diversity Trust to be caught in the crosshairs of that kind of fight. I dodge it by saying, look, we're the only thing that you guys should agree on. I don't know what's going to happen 500 years from now. Either the pro-GM side will be correct and will be borne out, or the anti-GMO side will be correct and will be borne out. But whichever side ends up being the dominant one, they're going to be thankful that we conserve this diversity. So please, let there be at least one institution in this world that can focus on the actual work of conserving diversity rather than getting involved in this fight. And I'm old enough, frankly, to remember the days when the food system had a lot of problems and there were no GMOs. So I know that the debate is complicated, but I hope we can conserve the diversity and not get too distracted by the politics.
Hi, I have
Okay, sorry.
I have two questions. Is it okay?
I'll be quick.
Yeah. One is, does this vault contain also seeds from fruit, from trees or fruit? And the second question, do you have a description, for each seed that you collect, do you have the description of their growth and some molecular markers for it, or is just you collect everything even without any description?
Okay, I can answer those quickly. The seed vault focuses on plants for food and agriculture. I don't think we have any tree species there. Some species, of course, can't be saved in the form of seed like we're doing in the seed vault, so the trust works with others for conservation of things like bananas, apples, and such. We do assemble information. There is a database associated with the seed vault. It's a database provided to us by the depositor themselves. And the one thing that we do ask of the depositors is that they not send us any seed that we already have. We don't need to recreate the 7 million samples that are out there in the world. We just need one sample of each of the different types that we have.
I'm going to just nip off a couple minutes of your coffee break. So Tim, would you like to ask a quick question?
Thank you very much. What you've done is astounding and astonishing and absolutely amazing.
Someone adjust the microphone a little.
What you've done is amazing, and we all need to give you a great vote of thanks. You come back to the conservation of these seeds, and unless I missed it, you never mentioned what frequency with which you grow these plants out, because they don't last for forever, and that strikes me as being an astounding, again, amount of work. And could you give us some idea of what that involves?
Sure. Eventually, all seed will die, even stored at -18, which we have in the seed vault. But it differs by species quite dramatically. The higher oil content seeds seem to be the shortest lived. But seeds like lettuce are fairly short. But in those cases, we're talking about quite a few decades, maybe 75 to 100 years. At the other end of the spectrum, it's really quite amazing. And of course, we only have experimental result for this, but sorghum, we would expect under these conditions to last for almost 20,000 years. So what happens in the real world is that before we ever get to the point where we have to grow it out because the seed is losing, the germination rate is dropping too much, is that simply the act of the gene banks of supplying material for researchers means that their supplies dwindle and they grow it out for that reason.
I'm going to be really mean. Do you just want to make a comment?
One short question. You did mention the 1 billion farmers which are hardly self-sufficient. And what I'm asking is, could there be any strategy offered in order to allocate some of these communities and actually provide them selectively with the better seeds in order to improve this situation?
Well, yes. If we're talking about farmers who are sort of marginal subsistence farmers, then I think obviously modern plant breeding programs have had marginal impact there. But I think that's the challenge for the future, and I think gene banks should be involved, and packages of diversity, if you will, could be provided. We could envisage that. If we did it in the 1800s, I think we can do it today. To put the tools for adaptation in the hands of the farmers as they have been in the past.
Thank you very much, Carey.
Thank you. Thanks. Sorry.
I'm just actually really pleased that people are excited about this, as excited as I am. So we went 4 minutes over, so we'll just have to nip a little bit off of our coffee break.